Good morning, ladies. You are listening to Taking Care of Your Temple podcast. This is episode 10. We've actually gotten to 10 episodes. I'm really kind of excited about that. Woohoo. I am Dr. Melissa Rich. I am your host or hostess. The object of this podcast is to help women connect with God regularly and use his grace, power, and strength to improve their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. There are 4 ways that we do this. One is we keep our focus on God. That sounds really simple, but it can be difficult to do because we get distracted by so many things that are going on out in the world. So we have to not only keep our focus on God, but we have to keep returning our focus to God and kind of just ignore the distractions. Next is that we need to acknowledge that we are not enough on our own. When I was younger, this was a harder thing for me. Now that I'm older, I have no trouble admitting, you know what? I am not smart enough, strong enough, quick enough, capable enough, whatever enough. I need God's help in everything. So we need to do that. The good news is once we ask God for his help, he is happy to provide it. He never gets tired of it. Thank goodness. Next, remembering that it is about progress, not about perfection. I know that we tend to get impatient because we're not making progress fast enough. I was just talking to somebody about that. I feel like I am moving along at a snail's pace, and it's frustrating. But I have to remind myself, I am moving. I'm moving in the right direction. Not as perfectly as I would like, not as fast as I would like, but I'm getting there. You may need to do the same thing. And then we need to work on consciously changing our thoughts. Our thoughts affect everything in our life, how we act, how we feel, what we do, who we talk to. All of those things are affected by what we think. So if you are giving yourself negative, toxic messages that are left over from a previous stage of your life, it may be time to really make a conscious effort to change those thoughts. So I always start out each episode with a prayer, and I am going to go, and you've probably guessed, there's no guest. It's just me today. You are blessed. You're welcome. Let's go ahead and take this podcast to God. Lord, I just want to thank you so much for allowing me to do this. Thank you for the ladies who are listening and any men who are listening too. That's fine. And I just ask, Lord, that you will give me the words, that this will be helpful. That's just what I've always wanted to do. I want to help people, and I ask that you will allow me to do that. Thank you for your love. Amen. Okay. So my goal in this podcast is to do this weekly and to give really good tools and tips that will help you just handle life better. Today, as I said, it's going to be just me, even though sometimes I have awesome, amazing guests. Today, you have awesome, amazing me. How cool is that? The topic that I'm going to be addressing is one that I am very familiar with, more than I wanted to ever be. And it's one that is hugely prevalent right now, and that is anxiety. Anxiety has always been an issue. I was a family therapist for 28 years. I dealt with a lot of clients who had anxiety. 40 million Americans, I'm blown away by that, experience an anxiety disorder. And I'll talk about that in a minute, the difference between just regular anxiety and an anxiety disorder. But 40 million Americans have an anxiety disorder at some time in their lives. Worldwide, about 364 million people have an anxiety disorder. That is a lot of people. Anxiety, the other reason I wanted to do it for this podcast, anxiety is more common in women than men. We are twice as likely to develop anxiety as men are. I will say men tend to be more prone to anger. So, we all have our issues, but anxiety does tend to be more of a female issue. Anxiety issues are the most common mental illness in the U.S. Anxiety disorders. I think I said anxiety issues. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S. And bad news, if you have an anxiety disorder, you are likely to experience something like depression as well. It's called being comorbid, which means that a lot of times these disorders will cluster together. If you have one, you tend to be, I can't think of the word. You tend to be more likely to develop another one. So you're not just dealing with anxiety. Now you're dealing with anxiety and depression and maybe something else. So much fun. The COVID-19 pandemic did not help anxiety at all. In fact, it triggered a 25% increase in anxiety and depression worldwide. I mean, this was serious stuff. And really, it's because they've done a lot of research and a lot of shows on it. It's because so many people were just forced to hunker down at home. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't do anything. That does not help anxiety. So huge spike in anxiety since COVID. The bad news, okay, we've got back to these 40 million Americans who are experiencing an anxiety disorder. Only 36.9% of American adults who experience anxiety are getting some type of treatment. So not even quite 37% are getting treatment. The really, really sad news about that is that anxiety is so treatable, but you have to get some type of treatment. And a lot of people just feel like, well, this is just me. This is just how I'm supposed to be or how I'm going to be. And there's nothing I can do about it. And they don't. So sometimes I will say, if it's mild, anxiety can go away by itself, or the person is fortunate enough to find some good tools and they're able to deal with it. But a lot of times, ladies, that does not happen. It just gets worse. My late husband was a dentist. Some of y'all know that. And I learned, because I helped out in his office some, that if you have a cavity, if you have any type of tooth issue, go to your dentist. Those issues typically do not go away. In fact, they become worse. So what started out as, if you went to the dentist, what they call a one surface filling, where it was just a minor little thing, it would have been less than $100 back when he was alive. I don't know how much it would be now. Now, because you've ignored that for several months, now it's morphed into a root canal, which is several $1,000s. So it's the same type of thing with anxiety. It just tends to get worse the more you ignore it. And the more you try to tell yourself, oh, it's not a problem, it's no big deal, the more it becomes a problem and a big deal. So it is worth addressing. So let's talk about the difference between an anxiety disorder, which is something that is diagnosed. It's in the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, I think. I've got mine over there, but I can't read it from here, but I think that's right. So it's in there, versus what is called situational disorder. All right, situational disorder is something that we all have at one time or another. It is a sense, an intense sense of fear and dread or anxiety that is caused by a specific event or situation. Some of the symptoms of situational anxiety: rapid or irregular breathing. You're just like that, like you can't quite catch your breath. Increased heart rate. You can feel your heart just like pounding out of your chest almost. Stomach cramping or pain, and diarrhea. These two, that's where I get anxiety. It's in my gut. My stomach is churning. I am running to the bathroom. It's not pleasant, but that's typically where I get it. And people experience it in different places. One that I've also dealt with anxiety is difficulty concentrating. Your mind is so caught up in whatever's going on that you have a hard time paying attention to what it is that you're trying to do. This does not help in work because you keep getting distracted. Some people can develop dizziness or dry mouth or lightheadedness. A lot of people can become irritable. They get very snappy and short and curt when you say something to them. It's a symptom of the anxiety. Doesn't excuse it, but it's a symptom of anxiety. Muscle tension, and that's because people can just be so tense and they're just like clenching their teeth. One of the things that can develop, again, I know this because of Ed being a dentist, is TMJ. And it stands for something mandibular jaw or joint. It's a condition that people get when they clench their teeth so much, and it can just cause migraines and all kinds of things because you're clenching your teeth. You can end up having to wear some type of an appliance at night to realign your teeth back the way that they're supposed to be. But again, it stems directly usually from stress. People can develop nausea, nervousness, restlessness, or like shaky or trembling, excessive sweating. A big one is trouble sleeping. And I've dealt with that myself. I've had nights where I just can't get to sleep because my mind keeps coming back to, what am I going to do? What about this? Da, 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 da. You also can have panic attacks due to situational anxiety. Those can happen. So there are a number of situations that are most often linked to situational anxiety. Some of the really common triggers for this include things like your first day at school or a new job. Are they going to like me? What if I don't make friends? What if I have to eat lunch all by myself? All these things that we go through. It can be scary. And this is something that kids deal with when school starts as well. Kids can experience a lot of situational anxiety the first week of school. Job interviews. I want this job so badly. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they ask me a question that I totally blank? That can be a big, huge one. Making some type of presentation. A lot of times at work nowadays, this is something that people have to do. It can be live in the office, or it can be online in Zoom, like I'm recording this right now. But whatever it is, it can be scary if you're not very good at presenting. This is one area I do not get anxiety in, but I have different ones. But for a lot of people, this is a big one. First dates. This is one that was so long ago for me. I honestly don't remember, but I'm sure I had that, where you were like, oh, we're going to have anything to talk about? Are they going to be nice? What if they're a total jerk? What if, I can't wait to get out of there or whatever. And that's when I've heard people doing this, especially with cell phones. When I was first dating, there were no cell phones, but I've known of people they will text a friend and have them call when the date's not going well. And they say, oh, no, really? Oh, okay, I'll be right there. And so they are able to get out of the date. Traveling to a new place or moving. I've moved a lot. Counted up one time. And when I was growing up, I went to 12 different schools between 1st and 12th grade. Now, I loved it. My parents made it fun and an adventure. But as an adult, I found it is more of a hassle because I have to find a grocery store, where's the TV news station that I like? Where's a good park that I can go walk my dogs? All these things that you just don't know when you go to a new place that make life easy. You don't have any of those things. And it can be stressful not to have them. Being away from home, especially for college students, a lot of college students get situational anxiety because it's the first time they've been away from home. I've taught at a couple of universities, and I have seen this, where there's a certain percentage of students that don't make it through the first semester. They are so homesick, nervous, anxious, stressed, whatever you want to call it, that they can't deal with it. And I think this happens more in the bigger universities where it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. A lot of schools now do have a student retention office. And my sister-in-law, Heather Green, who just had a birthday, works at one at Mary Hardin Baylor in Temple, Texas. And that's what they do. That's what their job is to retain the students, to keep them there, to make sure that they're connected, that they're plugged in. And this used to be something that nobody did. If you didn't make it, oh, well, too bad for you. But this is a real issue. Meeting people at a social gathering or making small talk with strangers. For a lot of people, going out to eat, even with friends, or going to a party is hugely scary. And I can, again, my therapeutic background, I can pretty much guarantee you go to a party, there are a couple of people in that room who, even though they look okay, they are petrified inside. They are scared to death. So talk to people. If you're one of those people who that is not an issue for you, spread the love. Go out and talk to people. Making small talk with strangers, I have to laugh at this one because I have the opposite problem. Having been and I've talked to other therapists who have the same thing. Having been a therapist for almost 30 years, I'm used to asking very personal, probing questions. That was my job. I mean, I had to do that. And so I have to be careful not to do that in social situations. I remember years ago, I was at a party talking to some guy that I'd met him once or twice. And so he's telling me some stuff. And I found myself saying, unfortunately, after I said it, so why do you think you got 3 divorces? Why do your wives, make a habit of leaving you? And I immediately thought, Melissa, this is not a therapy session. No, this is not appropriate. Poor guy. He stammered out something and went to talk to somebody else. But this is, so like I said, this is not my issue at all. I just have to watch it that I don't get in too deep, because especially if I like the person, I'm interested. I want to know, that's just kind of my training. Public speaking is another one that can trigger a lot of situational anxiety. For many people, this is their number one fear, or one of their number one fears is public speaking. I have preachers on both sides of my family. Give me a pulpit and a microphone, I'm a happy girl. So, but we all have different fears. This is not one of mine. Basically, being in a new, unfamiliar situation is a common trigger for situational anxiety. The key here for situational anxiety is that in most cases, once the situation is over, the anxiety begins to subside. You feel better. You're over it. Whew. Okay, things are better. And I have certainly suffered my share of situational anxiety. I'm sure I'll continue to do that. At times, it's pretty mild. I'm like barely going to be on time for an appointment, and traffic is really heavy, and I'm not sure I'm going to make it on time, and I am stressed out and anxious because I hate being late. Okay, very stressful at the time. As soon as the meeting starts, I'm fine, even if I'm late. I apologize, and life goes on. At other times, even situational anxiety can be severe, and it can go on for several weeks to months. Several weeks ago, my great nephew Ami, who was only a few weeks old at the time, was in the hospital with severe RSV, and it's respiratory something virus, I think. It's serious. We weren't sure he was going to make it. His mom, Hannah, my niece, was posting Facebook updates a couple of times a day. We were all praying fervently and worrying. And happily, he recovered. And he is a strong, healthy little boy right now. We are all very, very grateful. So, although the main criteria for situational anxiety is that once a situation is done, the anxiety clears up, occasionally that does not happen, especially if the situation goes on for a long time, for months, as in, and I dealt with this a lot when I was a therapist, a prolonged, ugly divorce. Even when the divorce is final, and that part is a little better because these people were in this anxiety mode for so long, some of them did develop an anxiety disorder. That usually doesn't happen, but occasionally I have known it too. So there is some overlap between situational anxiety and an anxiety disorder. Now, that was situational anxiety. Again, the criteria is it's brought on by a specific event. Usually the person knows what it is. I am nervous and I am scared because I have to make this presentation at work tomorrow. I'm starting a new job next week. Whatever it is, you know what it is. Once you get past that, most of the time, the anxiety starts to subside. Okay, anxiety disorders. There are 6 main ones that I'm going to go over, and I'm just going to give like a thumbnail sketch of each one. I'm not really going to go into too much depth, because if you think you have one of these, hop online and just search it. Generalized anxiety disorder, also called GAD. This is characterized by chronic anxiety, exaggerated worry and tension, even when there's little or nothing to provoke it. And I hear this all the time. I don't know where this is coming from. Really, my life is going pretty well right now. My kids are healthy. I have a good job. I don't know why I'm experiencing this. That's very typical of an anxiety disorder. The other thing is that these feelings that you have in generalized anxiety disorder, they interfere with daily activities. So people have a hard time going to work. They call in sick a lot, or they don't go to family gatherings. The normal things that they would do, they're feeling so stressed, tense, and worried that they are not doing them, or they're doing them with great difficulty, and they're doing them less frequently. The ongoing worry and tension can be accompanied by physical symptoms. A lot of the same symptoms that I gave for situational anxiety can be restlessness, difficulty concentrating, trouble sleeping, feeling on edge. And a lot of times, the worries that they're experiencing focus on everyday things, job responsibilities, family health, car repairs, appointments. I've had people, the family health is a big one, that my family's great, but I am so worried that I'm going to go to work and my child will die or be in a bad accident. Even though the likelihood of that happening, they know is pretty small, it's still worrying them. So that's generalized anxiety disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. Do any of y'all remember the TV show Monk? It was one of my favorites. It was a great example of OCD. He was always washing his hands, touching, counting. So obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder. It's characterized by recurrent unwanted thoughts, those are the obsessions, and or repetitive behaviors, those are the compulsions. So the behaviors can be things like washing your hands over and over, counting, checking, cleaning a lot. And the people perform these in the hope that it will prevent the obsessive thoughts from happening and make them go away. Now, all of us sometimes will check more than we should. Okay. I live by myself. Well, mostly. And I'm a widow. So I will sometimes check that I locked all the doors more than once because I can't remember, did I already do this or was that last night? So that's fine. But when you check them 20 times, and I'm not exaggerating, that can be bordering into OCD. I've seen this before where people literally cannot get out of their house because they go back 30 times to make sure that the stove is off. Did I unplug the iron? Did I lock the front? I mean, they keep, and they know that they did, but they keep doing it. So performing the rituals of counting, of hand washing, of cleaning, or whatever does give them some temporary relief, but it's very temporary. And if they don't perform those rituals, then their anxiety just starts to escalate and it gets worse and worse and worse. So again, when they wash their hands or go check the doors again, then, oh, okay, they feel better for a little bit. Okay, panic disorder. This is characterized by unexpected, kind of out of the blue, and repeated episodes of intense fear. And they're accompanied by physical symptoms, such as chest pain. That's a very common one. Heart palpitations, just your heart is just beating so hard. Shortness of breath, dizziness, abdominal distress. Because the symptoms can be so severe, and especially because they just happen out of the blue, a lot of people who experience a panic attack think they're having a heart attack. That's very, very common. And especially the first time, you've never had this before, you don't know what this is. A lot of people end up going to a hospital, which is not a bad thing because really the only way to figure out if it's a panic attack or if it's your heart is to go to a hospital or maybe a doctor's office and get hooked up to machines and let them see. When it's a panic attack, they'll assess, and they'll come back and they will tell the person your heart is fine. It's probably a panic attack. And then on top of everything else, the person feels stupid because, oh my gosh, I've never had a panic attack before. It can happen. They can be expected in response to a particular event or something that happened, or sometimes they happen for no reason at all. They just do. So much fun. Okay. Phobias, including specific phobias. A phobia is an excessive, most of us know what a phobia is, or persistent fear of a specific object, situation, or activity that usually is not that harmful. Okay. People know that their reaction is excessive, but they can't overcome it. And these fears can cause such distress that people will go to extreme lengths to avoid the situation. Probably the most common that people know of is fear of flying. And I have heard, I know they used to, this was pre-COVID, I don't know if they still do, but there were some desensitization approaches where they would help people overcome fear of flying. And desensitization means that you're just exposed to whatever it is a little bit more, until you kind of get over the fear. So they would start meeting at a restaurant near an airport. Then they would go to the airport. And then they'd go out to a plane. Then they'd get on the plane, even though it wasn't going anywhere, just a kind of a progressive thing. Some other examples are fears of things like spiders, fear of public speaking, fear of leaving your house. There's fear of clowns. A lot of people are afraid of clowns. I don't have that one, but I guess they could be scary. So there's lots of different types of fears that are out there. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Many of us have now heard of this. It's becoming more familiar. In the past, really didn't understand what it was. And back in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, it was called by different names: shell shock, battle fatigue, or combat fatigue. PTSD is an anxiety disorder that can develop after exposure to a really scary event or ordeal in which the person was harmed or was threatened to be harmed. They thought they were going to be. So this can be things like being mugged or attacked, a really bad car accident, a tornado destroying your home. And guys, this can be a big one. I lived in Oklahoma for 25 years. I was in Tornado Alley, and I've seen the aftermath of tornadoes where it looks like a war zone. Entire neighborhoods are leveled. So I get why this is one. Being in a war or surviving a plane crash. All of these can be events that can trigger PTSD. And the interesting thing is, you can have 10 people go through the exact same event. One or two people may develop PTSD, and the others may be okay in varying degrees. They may still have some issues. So some of the symptoms of PTSD include remembering or thinking about the traumatic event constantly, over and over, even when you don't want to. It just keeps popping into your head. Also reliving it or having flashbacks or having nightmares about it. There is a lot of avoidance with PTSD. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to make it go away. So a lot of times they will avoid places, activities, or people that remind you of the event. When I was in Oklahoma working as a therapist, I ended up working with a lot of military vets doing PTSD assessments for them. I probably did a couple of hundred. And what I realized is that a lot of the military, even though they go through some horrific events, I mean, war is pretty horrific. A lot of the military, especially the older ones, have this, what I used to call suck it up and deal mentality. We don't talk about it. It's just going to go away. We're just going to not think about it. And that just doesn't always work. So I remember, I've never forgotten this one. I was talking to an older gentleman. He was in his late 70s or early 80s doing a PTSD assessment for him. He was a veteran of the Korean War. So I'm asking him this question. So he's telling me this stuff, and he goes, "Ma'am, I want you to know that you are the first person I've ever spoken to about this." It was like 50 years ago. And I was just floored. He had never talked to anybody about it. And that's very typical. The other thing that I do want to point out is that anything can trigger PTSD. Even if it's not traumatic to one person, it may be to somebody else. And the example that I always give of this, one of the veterans that I was talking to had grown up in someplace like Puerto Rico, tropical, warm, beaches, palm trees, joined the military, got stationed in Alaska, not tropical, warm, or all of that. He got there in a horrible winter, just wind blowing all the time, snow, hardly any daylight. People in his unit were losing toes to frostbite pretty frequently. He developed PTSD from the weather because it was so foreign to him. And I get it. I hate being cold. I don't think I do it to the point of PTSD, but I hate being cold. So I understand. And I just want y'all to see really anything can cause PTSD. So the last one I want to talk about, the last phobia, is social phobia or social anxiety disorder. This is another one that's very common. This one is characterized by overwhelming anxiety and just a lot of self-consciousness in everyday social situations. So it may be limited to just one type of situation. Maybe they're fine in everything except they hate speaking in front of people. Or maybe they're fine in a lot of things. They just don't like eating and drinking in front of people. I found this one out when my husband and I got married. He didn't like, now he was getting past this one, but he said all growing up, he couldn't eat in front of people. I'd never heard of that before, but apparently it's very common. So in its broadest form, the social anxiety may be just so broad and so pervasive that the person experiences symptoms almost anytime they're just around other people, period. It doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter really what's going on. They're experiencing this social anxiety. So guess what? They avoid social situations. So anxiety is absolutely thriving in our world today, whether it's situational or a type of disorder. It's almost impossible to avoid. So really, we all need to learn to deal with it effectively, because I can pretty much guarantee we are all going to experience it at some time or another. The problem is that we tend to get into patterns of reacting or ways that we respond to certain situations. So some common ways that people handle anxiety that are not helpful are ruminating. Ruminating is this state of kind of cyclical worry and negative messages to yourself. You just kind of go over and over what happened. You're brooding about it. And usually the brooding, you're focusing on something that you did wrong or think you did wrong. I can't believe I said that. That was so stupid. They must think I'm a total idiot. You're going over and over on that. Or somebody did something to you that you perceive as wrong. I can't believe they said that to me. That was so horrible. How dare, whatever, on and on and on. So it becomes this almost obsessive set of messages that you go through over and over. Things like, I can never do anything right. Bad things always happen to me. No one likes me. I'll never be able to fill in the blank. These ruminations are almost always negative. They focus on what we're doing wrong and what is going wrong for us. And people who ruminate a lot, and we all do it at times, okay? They tend to have a victim mentality, and they usually feel powerless to change things. I'm doing a little aside here. Martin Seligman is the father of the positive psychology movement, and he developed the concept of learned helplessness, which plays into this. This happens when somebody has experienced a stressful, negative, or traumatic situation repeatedly, over and over and over. They come to believe that they have no power or control over the situation, so they quit trying to change it, even when help is available, because they don't believe it's going to work. So they are stuck. Now, the good thing is that this is fixable. This is absolutely a false belief. With God's help, change is always possible. But sometimes we have to remind them of this. And this is seen a lot in schools. A lot of kids have learned helplessness. But again, a lot of the schools are focusing on this now. They recognize it, and they're able to help correct that for the kids. Another thing that happens a lot as a way of dealing with anxiety is catastrophizing. This is constantly putting the worst possible interpretation on things, or looking towards the future and expecting the worst to happen, and just not expecting, knowing that that is what's going to happen. So they tend to look at the future really negatively, with a sense of doom, suspicion, worry, apprehension, dread, sometimes even paranoia. And they really tend to be vulnerable to negative thinking or worst case scenarios. So these people are not, things won't be bad. They're not thinking things will be bad. Things will be horrible. The glass is not half full or half empty. It is bone dry. I mean, that really is their mentality. And I am pretty much a dyed-in-the-wool optimist. You may be able to tell that. When Ed was alive, my husband, he was very much a pessimist. However, drove me crazy. What he would say to that is, I'm not a pessimist. I'm a realist. Drove me nuts. And I've heard other people say that too. Why is it so much more realistic to look at the negative than the positive? They're both there. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. And then the last pattern I want to look at is avoidance. Now, avoidance is a tricky beast. It can be helpful sometimes and can be effective in the short term, because sometimes by avoiding the uncomfortable situation, the person does feel better. And honestly, there are situations we should all avoid. Okay. If you are a recovered alcoholic, you should avoid bars. That's a good idea for you. So I'm not saying that avoidance is all bad. However, repeatedly staying home instead of going out to dinner with friends or family can make you feel better very short term, but it can also develop into an unhealthy coping pattern of you isolating yourself. And there are no healthy hermits. That's not original for me. I would give credit if I knew who said it, but I don't. But I really believe that's true. The problem is that the more you practice avoidance, the harder it can become to then face any type of difficult situation. And y'all, life is full of difficult situations. I mean, I wish I could tell you otherwise, but it is. So dropping the class that you were really interested in taking does remove that anxiety, but now you're limiting your options because you can't go pursue that degree or that certification. The more we withdraw from life, the less we're able to feel and the less we're able to do. So we kind of deaden ourselves, and that's not helpful. That's not how God wants us to experience life. So we've got a pretty good idea of the problem now. And a lot of you are either living with anxiety yourself or you know somebody who is, so you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, this is going to be a 2-part one because it's going to be long. It's already long. So I'm going to do part 1 here, and then the next one next week we'll do part 2, just so y'all know. I meant to tell you that at the beginning. I forgot. So let's look at what God says about anxiety. Would y'all like to know? Yeah, I'm going to tell you. Does anyone know how many times God tells us not to be anxious and not to worry? Yeah? Any hands? No? Okay, I'll tell you. I've always heard it's 365 times, and I have not gone through and counted that, but that sounds exactly right, because that's one for every day of the year. It's almost like he knew we would need to hear that. Yeah? Okay. So he tells us that in the Bible a lot. Don't worry. Fear not. Don't be anxious. He keeps saying that over and over and over. So I guess he's hoping we will eventually get this. So here are some of my favorite verses about fear, anxiety, and worry. Favorite one, Isaiah 41:10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God, thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Yes, that's the King James Version. I like that for some memorizing things. So good. Don't be afraid. He is with me. Don't be dismayed. I'm your God. I will strengthen you. Again, this is getting back to we don't have to do this on our own strength. I will help you. I will uphold you. Ladies, he has us in his right hand. He is holding us. We're good. We just have to tell ourselves and start believing that. Another verse that I really like, I'm going to give you a little background. This is in Exodus. Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they are approaching the Red Sea. Guess who's coming behind them? Y'all remember your Bible? Yeah, the Egyptians. They're not happy. So here are the children of Israel with Moses. The Red Sea is in front of them. The Egyptians are behind. They are scared to death. And I kind of get it. I would probably be having some anxiety then too. So they say to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Okay, that's kind of the background. That's Exodus 14. Now, 13 and 14. Love this. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Isn't that good? I mean, he's just telling them, God has this. It is okay. You are not going to see these Egyptians again. And they didn't, because the Red Sea enveloped them. And I love the last part, which I suspect Moses added on his own. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Because they were moaning and groaning and griping and complaining. I'm sure he was tired of hearing it. But I love that verse. I have that up on my bathroom wall and read it off every morning. Another one. Psalms 34, 4-5. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. Oh, that's so good. And there was this absolutely wonderful song on this by Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir on YouTube. It is Psalm 34 live. Brooklyn Tab is so good. So y'all need to listen to that if you haven't seen it. I'm going to put all of this in the on the Facebook book for this episode. There'll be a document with links that you can hit to go to listen to these things or see them. Another one that I love, it's not specifically related to anxiety, but it kind of is. It's called I Have a New Name by Hosanna Wong. And I'm going to have a link for that too. So powerful, so good. It really, if you're the type who beat yourself up a lot, you need to listen to this and you need to bookmark it. I've recommended this to people who have said, I listen to that every day, sometimes a couple of times a day, and you probably should too. And then the last resource that I'm going to put on this one, so good, is a song called I Have to Believe. And I can't believe I didn't put the artist. Now I can't remember it. Anyway, I'm going to have a link for it. And I have had times where I have been so anxious, so stressed, so overwhelmed. I feel like I'm holding on with my fingertips. And what I remembered during this is the story in the Bible about the disciples who couldn't heal this boy who was convulsing. He was possessed by an evil spirit, and they brought him to Jesus. So the Father asked Jesus to heal him if he could. And Jesus replied, This is in Mark 9, by the way. If I can, all things are possible for one who believes. The Father immediately replied, I believe. Help my unbelief. How good is that? This song, I have to believe, Rita Springer, I think. Anyway, the link will be there. It has that little part in there. And this was recommended by a friend of mine, Krista Stevenson. I hope I have the last name right. I'm blanking right now. But I've listened to this multiple times. It is so good. And it's an old video. It's just the lyrics. So if you keep, because I kept looking, well, where's the performance thing? There's not one. It's just her singing with the lyrics. So good. So that is really, really excellent. Okay. I'm also going to have in the Facebook group some thought optimizers for anxiety, things that you can say to yourself over and over to start reprogramming your brain. I have clients do this all the time. And then I'm going to put on there some verses for anxiety. So all of that will be available for you. And I am now going to give you, I'm going to morph, and again, part 2, I'm going to get into, here are some things that you can do. And I have a whole list of tips and tools and techniques and tricks that you can try that will help you start feeling better. And don't just have one or two things. That's kind of like, I always give the example of, that's like a carpenter only having a hammer. That's great when you need to pound nails in, but if you need to saw boards or turn screws or whatever, you can tell how much I've built. That's not very helpful. You want lots of different tools in your tool belt. And that's what I'm going to be giving in the next episode. So be sure and come back for part 2. Okay. Fun fact about Waco. Waco has Cameron Park, which is a 416-acre park that has trees, 2 rivers, cliffs, playgrounds, splash pads, and a national recreation trail system. The William Cameron family donated the parkland more than 100 years ago, and the park is used constantly. It's a great place to walk. It goes right, the Brazos River goes right by it. It's just so fun. And there's some really big hills that I like walking up. So there is a Lover's Leap in there that it's up pretty high. There is a place called Miss Nellie's Pretty Place, and it has bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and black-eyed Susans. It's a really popular place for taking pictures. There is a fountain plaza, walking path, and a lot of times it will serve as an outdoor classroom for different groups. There is a staircase called Jacob's Ladder that is pretty steep. It has, I think, 88 steps that winds around, goes to the top. It was originally built in the early 1900s by a family that lived at the very top of it, of the bluff. And it was originally constructed out of cedar trees from the park. It's still there today. They are they refurbish it periodically. And then the Cameron Park Zoo, natural habitat, accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. There's an Asian forest, African savanna, Brazos River country, 50,000-gallon saltwater aquarium. So it's very cool. It's a fun place to go. I see a lot of dog walkers there, runners. Cameron Park is very cool. If you're ever in Waco, make a point to go there. Okay. So along with this podcast and Waco Hypnosis Center, I do public speaking. If you're interested in having me for an event, you can contact me through my website at www.drmelissarich.com, or you can email me at info@drmelissarich.com. And if you enjoyed this podcast, ladies or gentlemen, please do one or more of the following. I would really appreciate it. Follow me, write a review, share the episode, subscribe. I am really working on building up the audience for this podcast. I would like to reach and help as many people as possible. And I will tell you, social media is not my strong point, but some of you out there are whizzes at it. And so if you could help share the word, I would really, really appreciate it. All right, that is it for this podcast episode. We finished number 10. Yay. Be sure and come back for number 11, because then I will get more into anxiety. God bless. Bye.